Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to be chatting with Marce, who is the founder and executive director of Azul. My name is Gloria Malone, and I'm here to chat with Marce about Azul's work, plastics, and the UN's upcoming meeting about plastic treaty. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me.
Gracias. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So first, I want to get into that the Azul team just came back from Rhode Island, where they hosted a booth at the Newport stop of the Ocean Race. So, what is the Ocean Race? Because I've never heard about this, and why was it so important for Azul to be in attendance?
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited. So we had a fabulous rock star team that attended the stop over there. The Ocean Race is an around the world sailing race that has been happening for 50 years. I think this is the 50th anniversary. And a little bit of trivia, the first race back in the 70s was actually won by a Mexican team aboard the Sayurita. So that was a really interesting thing because I didn't really have a connection right off the bat. So it was really cool to learn that. It was very exciting to have our team go there because we have over the last couple of years had a lot of interest for folks in Providence specifically in Rhode Island that are very interested in talking more about plastics and plastic pollution. So it was really cool to be able to have our team connect with community on the ground. I do know that we were like the only NGO, the only group there that were, bilingual to Spanish. And I think people don't realize how strong and well established the Latinx community is, especially in Providence. So it was really cool to be able to connect and meet new people. And again, very interested in abating plastic pollution. So we look forward to connect further.
Wonderful. And so, speaking of plastics, you're on your way to the United Nations Environmental Programme's second INC meeting. And basically, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that these INC meetings are a place to discuss a global plastic treaty. And so, why is this treaty needed?
Yes, so we're very excited. I'm literally just about to close my suitcase. Headed to the plastic treaty negotiations. This is the second round. We are going to have several of them. So back in 2022, following years and years of work from civil society and countries, the UN, the UN at the Environmental Assembly decided to vote to create an to create a plastics treaty. What that means is that they said, okay, you now have a couple of years to negotiate this, discuss amongst yourselves, as teacher said. And we have about 2 years to create this. This is something that the countries are negotiating. And what is important here is that there is a conversation and the mandate is actually quite broad, which is good because we need to talk about the full cycle of plastics. And I actually refuse to say life cycle because it's full of destruction at all steps. So we need to talk about, not just marine pollution, but also upstream concerns, let's say, fossil fuel extraction, disposal, etc., and how it affects primarily fence-side communities around the world. And it is extremely important because we have a lot of what is called waste colonialism, where countries will export their waste to other less developed or economically developed countries. And so it's very important that we have something that encompasses the whole world so that we really reduce those inequalities and that shifting of burden to other places.
Okay, so you just said a lot. I'm just going to take a second to process and maybe ask a follow-up question or two. So you talked about the colonial disposal and things like that. What first came to mind to me was this great fast fashion, which a lot of people don't realize that a lot of fast fashions are plastics, right? Like those materials are plastic. And there's a huge fast fashion dump in Chile, which is, of course, a country in Latin America.
Yes. And I think people don't realize, especially in the last, what has it been, the last year and a half or so, it's oh, vegan leather. It's vegan leather is just plastic. So, it's very important to learn about that because, people don't realize how much investment there is in making some of these things appealing to us and don't realize how some of these things that we may not actually be inclined to do are in front of us. So, right, nobody wants to, let's say, give endocrine disruptors to their babies, but you probably don't think about that when you buy that particular toy that's made out of plastic. Do you think about like, oh, I'm gonna wear plastic pants? I don't know about that. So we have to become more, obviously, a lot more vigilant. But it's also very, very important that there are strong rules for producers who are really the ones that are creating this problem, and not just leave it to an individual, which is something that happens sometimes, and we kind of like put the responsibility on the individuals versus the ones that are actually creating the problem.
Yeah, and then another thing you mentioned was like the upcycle or the upstreams of pollution. And I saw a tweet on you all's Twitter not too long ago that it was like an image, and it said, plastic pollution starts well before it gets into the ocean. And that struck me as weird, to be honest with you, because when I think about plastics, right, we've been trained and like kind of thought to think about the turtle or the fish that has like the plastic ring around it, but you're kind of saying that plastic pollution starts well before then.
Yes, I mean, I think that obviously we all feel for the turtle with the straw up its nose, but it's extremely important that we think about the fact that by the time that straw or that ring or that bag has gotten to the ocean, it has created and left a wake of destruction in its path. What do I mean? We are talking about fence line communities around the world that are having to deal with the production in their backyard, that are having to deal with extraction. Plastic pollution actually drives further extraction of fossil fuels, and people don't realize that, right? And so, like one of the biggest producing meccas, what they call petrochemicals, in the world is actually here in the U.S. in the Gulf South Coast, and people don't realize that we have that, and people have to deal with that there. And so it is important. Obviously, it's important everywhere that it happens, but it is also happening here in people's backyards, and mostly it's people that have, that already have other other factors that make them more vulnerable to this. And we have seen this, and I will plug our report here. A couple of years ago, we were asked by the UN, per se, UNEP, to create a report about this. This was commissioned, and so you can see the link there because people are fabulous on the team. And here we talk about that specific thing. Is it just about marine pollution, which obviously is extremely bad and very grave, but it's also about, this specific report talks about considering every single one of the sustainable development goals, which talks about, gender parity and access to work and clean water, and how plastic pollution and plastic production actually impacts every single one of those. And we don't think about that. But when we did this research, we were looking at the fact that, for example, women are more exposed to plastic via sanitary issues, or because of like the work disparities, etc. And so it is important that we think about plastic as a global problem that is in a lot of places, and not just impacts turtles, which is very, very grave, but it lets a lot of people off the hook when you think that way.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because it becomes it becomes about one straw that one person misplaced,
Yes.
versus the several straws that are created and cause air pollution and water pollution and all of these other things in communities well before the straw makes it to wherever the straw ends up. And so that really touches on a number of things. And you talked about the UN report and some of the findings that were in that report and why we need a global plastic treaty. And so I recently read a piece that was a little bit disturbing, right? Hearing all this, and then I'm like, oh, yay, advocates are going to go to Paris and and have these conversations. And then I read a piece in The Guardian that said that the UN is making some last minute changes. And basically, many of the people who have registered and found ways to make it to this the second INC meeting are not going to be able to attend. And so why is this last minute switch up on the UN's part so upsetting for these conversations?
Yes, and I am reminded of something that my grandmother used to say growing up: "No hagas cosas buenas que parecen malas." Don't do good things that may look bad. And I don't know, we don't know where this is coming from, but the fact is that we were all allowed to register up to 5 people to quote attend. And then last week we were just told that out of those 5 people, only one of them would actually be able to enter the building where the conversations are being held. So this is extremely difficult because many, many people around the world, and I'm talking about, this is Paris. It's actually being held at the same time as the at the French Open, which I had never followed, but I had to deal with because the hotels were more expensive and transportation was more expensive, and people from all around the world are coming to make sure that they bring their stories, that they're able to talk to the delegates from the countries, that they're making sure that everything is considered properly as they're negotiating, which could be the largest or the most important, second most important treaty in environmental matters since the Paris Accord. And now we're being told that only one person is going to be in for every organization. So people have been fundraising and making sure that they get there and doing all this work in preparation, and now they're going to be outside. So literally the door could be closed to everything from environmental justice advocates, fence line community advocates, indigenous communities advocates, scientists, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a very concerning thing because we have already had a session which was held in November, and at that time there were 1,500 attendants. And so the understanding is that as you go further, there's more attendance growing. And knowing this, they still only pick the venue that holds 1,500 people and then put on all these concerns. So all these constraints. So we should be looking at creating more ways for the public to participate, for civil society to participate, for advocates to participate, not less.
Absolutely. And it gets to like the heart of why you founded Azul, right? It's like
Yes.
you shouldn't be, people of color shouldn't be the only ones in the room. And it sounds like that's what the UN is replicating by this last minute switch up.
Yes. You have these concerns where eventually things happen where only a cadre of people, only like certain people get to have this conversation on something that really affects so many people around the world, that disproportionately affects people with the least political power, with the least economic power. And then we are then curtailing their ability to interact, to talk to really just testify about their concerns and how this could affect them. And we should be creating more on-ramps and opportunities, not less.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
I know people can follow along on Azul's social media, particularly your Twitter, where you all will be posting updates, Facebook, Instagram, as well as the email list where they can get information about all of the events that you all put on and some of the programs that you run as well. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
I will say that as concerning as this is, going into INC2, I am heartened by the fact that we have still time to go in the process. So, this is hard to deal with right now. We will figure out a way around it, but there is a couple of sessions more. So people that are interested should get involved. We need people wherever they are in the world, if they are interested in getting a strong plastic treaty, that they talk to their government, that they talk to representatives everywhere in the world to either encourage them to ask for accountability or for ask for higher ambitions. So this is exactly the time where people need to be getting involved.
Y'all heard it. Listen to Marce, get involved, continue to learn more about conservation, getting rid of plastics, getting a strong plastics treaty.
People-centered plastic treaty, as some of my colleagues say, people over profits, people over polluters.
Yes, I love that. And we will leave you all with that. Thank you, Marce.